Welcome to the Thinking in Between podcast, where we explore the borderlands between health and social science. In each episode, we're joined by someone working in this space to share about three big ideas that have most influenced their thinking and practice. My name's Stephen Hibbs. I'm a doctor by background, and I'm currently doing an ethnographic PhD. Today I'm joined by Jen Randall, who's a senior lecturer in global health at Queen Mary University of London. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. And I just wonder if to start with, you could say a bit to introduce yourself.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Stephen. I really love the podcast. I've learned a lot listening to it, so it's a real honor to be here. So I've been teaching since about 1999 at universities in China, in the US, and in the UK. And I really love teaching, so that's my real passion. And I've worked at a number of different types of universities, and that's been a real privilege to meet students from lots of different backgrounds. And I've been at Queen Mary for 6 years, so I've been teaching on the online program and in our on-site program, working with medical students, working with master's students. And I come from anthropology, so I really like this blend of the natural and social sciences. And I really like thinking about how we can best teach and learn with and from our students. So that's kind of my passion project within the university. I really like talking about drug policy and harm reduction. And I'm also a mom, so it's a really big identity for me, both in how I look at the classroom and the topics we talk about, and what I hope some of our students can work on when they leave these spaces. So I think that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. I really am excited to talk about all three of the books that you've brought today. 2 out of 3 of them are people whose work I've also been influenced by, but they're not books that I've read, and one of them is new, so I'm really excited about this. And the first book that you've chosen today is by Paul Farmer, and it's called Infections and Inequalities, The Modern Plagues. So to start with, could you just tell us a bit about what is the book saying?
So if anybody knows medical anthropology, they probably would know of Paul Farmer. He was a very prolific writer, and this is my favorite book of his, and there are many to choose from. And I really recommend reading anything about or by Paul. This book has a really special place in my heart and in my journey because it was given to me by a fellow graduate student in like 2002. And I tried to dig out my copy, but it's buried because I'm still unpacking. But it's inscribed from René Cadzo as well as signed by Paul himself. The book, for me, reminds us that that some of these infections that we see as in other spaces are actually emerging and re-emerging around us all the time. And that when we look to what he calls the ethnographically visible, we can't ignore the really powerful geopolitical, historical forces that have placed people in the positions that he sees in that clinical encounter. So I read it early in my career, and it just profoundly changed the way I thought about infections and disease and structural violence, which is another piece that I nearly picked. And so his work has just deeply informed how I think about the world, how I think about medicine, even though I'm not a clinician, but I work with a lot of clinicians or clinicians in training. So I think his work is just really important. In fact, I just screened Bending the Arc, which is the documentary about him. And it makes me very sad that he is no longer here. but I hope in a small way, the way that I'm trying to introduce his work to students is a testament to his legacy.
Thank you.
And yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any particular passages or kind of examples of particular infections that kind of come to mind for you from your reading the book. Are there any passages that you find yourself either quoting or going back to, or kind of signposting to with students?
Well, I think one of the big takeaways from Paul's work is, being an anthropologist, sometimes the way in which anthropology is viewed is, we talk about culture, whatever culture is. But I think what Paul is reminding us constantly, whether it's about HIV in Haiti or if it's about Ebola in Sierra Leone, is that we have to be very careful that we're not using culture to excuse what are really structural issues. And I think he's very, very good at that, in challenging and holding that in all of the conversations that we have, and to refrain from really othering and exoticizing other people.
Yes.
And that was the first time I had encountered that idea, was in Infections and Inequalities, and he carries it over in Fevers, Feuds and Diamonds.
And that kind of term structural violence, which I guess is closely related to that, I guess moving beyond just classifying things as culture, which often ends up putting the responsibility back on those who are already oppressed and suffering, but turns the attention to the structures that people exist in. I just wonder if you could say a bit about what the term structural violence means, and maybe if there's any particular examples of that where something can be either viewed through a lens of culture or through a lens of structural violence.
I would definitely recommend his paper in Anthropology of Structural Violence as another resource to really work with. He's expanding on the idea that was proposed by Johan Galtung. So he was a peace study scholar, and I think what Paul is trying to show to us is that we cannot understand the situation that our patients or clients or service users are in without really pulling back the lens to understand, for example, in Haiti, why someone ends up with HIV and how that's related to Haiti's relationship with France and Haiti's relationship with the US, and that those long-term historical events and geopolitical connections continue to prescribe the circumstances in which people are trying to navigate their current world, which is sometimes really, really, really difficult. And that those vulnerabilities sit on, historical tectonic plates that we have a relationship with. And so the point with structural violence is that there is a discomfort around the complicity that maybe people who look like myself and sit in the global north have a relationship with. And that's not to make people feel guilty and not to make people, guilt, but to take a responsibility to and continue to discuss the fact that coloniality exists and these tensions and these power relations remain and take on new forms. I think you asked for an example, and I think more recently, like his work on Ebola, and subsequently the work of Eugene Richardson, who's written about this in Epidemic Illusions. None of the foreign workers that went in to assist with the Ebola crisis died of Ebola. They were given all of the required treatments and the treatments that were possible to treat Ebola. But that was not afforded to people who lived in those spaces and were from that area. And so he was very much challenging this containment over care paradigm, where for local people it was about containing, and for the people that were coming in to help, they were getting care. And we see that over and over and over again. We saw that with HIV in the WHO's position. We're not going to give antiretrovirals to poor people because it's not economically feasible, or they can't tell time, or other ridiculous racist tropes. And so Paul is continuously holding us to keeping that vigilant in our scope. But then he also is very practical and material, right? Like, we need the staff, stuff, space, systems, and support, and that's PIH's whole approach to health systems, is that's the on-the-ground stuff that people, because they are humans, have a right to.
And just for those who aren't familiar with PIH, so Partisan Health is the global health organisation that Paul Farmer set up, which with Ophelia Dahl and Jim Kim, which has quite a different approach, I think, to a lot of other global health organisations. And that film, Bending the Arc, highly recommend to anyone who's interested in this, because I think that story about what was done with HIV medications, but also there's a chilling scene in that film, isn't there, where it's experts in tuberculosis coming together and deciding that multi-drug resistant TB is not treatable in this kind of room of the great and the good. And his, I guess, moral clarity to say, like, this is a failure of imagination, and this is the room in which the violence is being done to those, rather than actually there being an out there reason why we can't do this. I wanted to ask you a bit about, because Paul Farmer is also someone who I've found a kind of guiding light really in the last few years as someone who just seems to have a clarity of thinking and navigating a space that is often so complicated and so, I guess, tied up in really terrible histories and ongoing structures. I just wonder, what is it, do you think, about his legacy and his way of approaching things that's led him to, I guess, occupy quite a special place for a number of us who look to him in that way?
I think it's his ability to pivot from the intimate to the massive macro structural stuff, right? Like, I think if you look at how Paul grew up, that was very much a part of his childhood, and his upbringing was this kind of social justice. But I want to be on the ground. I want to be doing something for this individual that's in front of me, while also at the same time being brave and courageous and outspoken, but very competent and very critical about the real stuff that is, resulting in the clinic that he's working in. And I think that's the real power. He was a beautiful writer and was brave, and had this kind of, like you said, like this just moral anchor that just brought people along with him. And it's that willingness to continue saying what needs to be said and what so many people are feeling they can't, that he really, he carved that path for many people.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to say about this book of what it's meant for you?
Yeah, it's I watched the film again this week, and I just feel like the world is a little less brighter without him in it, and I just think that there's so much to hold on to when we see what he was capable of, and that's why I love teaching. It's why I love classrooms, because we can we can bring him and his legacy into the room. And I look around and I think about, are there the Jims and Ophelias and Pauls sitting in our university that are going to go out and, they don't have to change global health, but they could do their part in their little space in the world, which is what all of us are capable of. So, yeah, I don't know. I find him a huge source of awe.
Thank you. The second book that you've chosen today is called High Price: Drugs, Neuroscience and Discovering Myself by Hart. I don't know anything about this book. I've not come across it before. Can you tell us what it's about and then about what it's meant for you? Okay,
so I learned about this book at a 4-year-old's birthday party. And there was a new friend-to-be named Anne Fordham was there, and she's the executive director of the International Drug Policy Consortium. And we're sitting at a birthday party for a young child with cake and sugar, and we ended up having this big conversation around how sugar is regulated or not. And Anne works in drug policy reform. And this was the year 2013. And I had just started a new job at the University of East London, where it was the first university that I had worked in where my race was very, very apparent in the classroom. I am a white woman, and I walked into a classroom of over 150 students, 90% of which were minoritized, racialized group people. So I was having a chat with Anne about what was happening in my teaching, and we were talking about sugar, and she was like, "Oh, you really need to look at the book, this new book that's come out by Hart." And I said, okay. So I bought it and I read it, and Carl is a African-American neuropsychopharmacologist at Columbia University, and he studies the effects of drugs on people. He's looked at methamphetamines, he's looked at crack cocaine in experiments. But he had just published this book, which does a couple of things. So it's a memoir of his life, growing up in Miami, and then the arc of his life coming to be a professor at an Ivy League university studying drugs. But it's not this like, oh, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps memoir. It's a really amazing analysis of the structural things that facilitated that arc, which is very impressive. He also talks really powerfully about drug policy and drug policy reform and where it's come from and why we need to maybe rethink some of this from an economic justice and a racial justice and a public health approach. So I read the book, and it's very well referenced from academic work, and this was all I was introduced to all of this in the context of a new teaching and learning experience at this university, where we were a widening participation university. So a lot of students were coming in through other routes than A levels. Very, very rich with life experience, but not necessarily having the capital in the university world. And I had just inherited a kind of skills module that I was going to be delivering to all of our first year public health students, which we had over 150 in the first year. And it was a 24-week course. And I read this book and I thought, oh, this is a voice of someone that might resonate with some of my students. And it is a really great reflection on structural violence and all of these other systems of oppression that we are experiencing. And it was a great public health topic as well, and it was really well referenced. And so I created this module around a reading of this book. And because it was a year-long module, I had 12 weeks in term 1 and 12 weeks in term 2. And so we read in this massive 150 students. I taught them from 9 to 11, 11 to 1, 1 to 3, 3 to 5. I taught all day, and I put them in small groups, and we learned our names, and we read the book over the course of 10, 12 weeks. And it was amazing. They saw in themselves some similarities in their story and their arc, and we ended up having chats about neoliberalism and intersectionality and really big stuff. And so I was really struck by what transformations were happening and what kinds of connections we were building, I think through the text, but also the way in which I was teaching them, which was, I committed to double my teaching load so that we could have these conversations, because I had never had to reckon with my race in my teaching space in that way. So it was a really big learning curve for me. So it came to the end of the first term, and I bought some Poundland Christmas cards, and I said, you've really resonated with this book. Why don't you, let's send him some Christmas cards. So I collected the couple of cards and sent them off to Carl, and didn't really hear anything. And then we had the second half of the term, which I had planned to then take the text and look at what he had referenced and do a kind of deep reading of some of the academic references, and then look at the way he was writing it. And so pivoting back and forth between the academic literature and something that was written for a lay audience. And so the second half, we were getting deeper into how do we think critically about evidence and academic work. And then the university was launching this civic engagement stream of funding and branding for the university. And I thought, well, why don't we, I had heard about using photo voice, and I thought this has been having this profound effect. Long story short, we did photo voice project with all of the students reflecting on some of the themes from the book. I applied for a pot of money, and we ended up in May of 2014, so 10 years ago, bringing Carl to meet the students. And they had curated an exhibition of quotes and reflections and highlights of what they had learned from the book and what they had learned about drug policy. And the vice chancellor came from the university. Like, it was a real moment of speaking truth to power, in the sense that it really felt like that institution, and lots of universities fetishize diversity and don't really understand the students that they might be teaching.
Yes.
And there was this immensely powerful connection then between all of the students and Carl, and so the book just fundamentally changed how I taught, how I thought about race, how I thought about drugs, how I thought about my teaching practice. It was, and I think it's a really brilliant book.
Yeah. Wow. And I love the thought that that starts with being given a module to teach that's called something like academic skills,
personal and professional development.
Right. Which brings up visions of like horrible PowerPoints where it's like week 1 searching the library, or like week 2 like how to use a reference manager, or like something that just, and it's like, I guess some of that stuff happens, but in a way that's alive in that second term, where you're saying, okay, well now shall we have a look at this? But it's kind of already, I guess, that it's got a bit of life to it somehow, and I don't know, like I'm just really interested to know, like, was there anyone who was looking over your shoulder enough that when you first said this is what we're going to do, that someone said, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound like professional, and or were you actually, did you have enough free rein that you could just go for it?
I was very, very fortunate that we were doing a redesign. So we were relaunching the curriculum. And we were moving from like these short, fat modules to long, thin modules. And so I had a lot of flexibility. And then once, it was like the second week, and it was like, whoa, there's something really big happening here. So I think, and then I integrated the second half with our research methods module. So we did proper focus groups. We analyzed transcripts together. We did a survey. We collected information. Then we made it visible in different creative ways. So when Carl came to walk through, like, there were 70 some languages spoken by these students, wow. Right? And we wrote out all of those languages, and we, the average age was something in their 30s, like the mostly women, mostly. We had a lot of Nigerian students that were working in healthcare, so it was a real demonstration and celebration of who the people were in that room, and that's where we started. And I still continue some of these practices today, right? Like, we learn each other's names. We use name tags until we know each other's names when we're sitting in a classroom together, and we don't shy away from talking about tough stuff. And what I find really pedagogically really powerful with drug policy is that everybody has an experience, whether you use these substances or not, like, they are in our lives. Even if you don't drink alcohol, if you move through London and the UK, you encounter it in some way. So it's a common topic, and it's also a topic that has lots of ideas and thoughts, and so and then we connected then with, so Anne Fordham put me in touch with other organizations that I still work with, like Release, which is a drugs charity, and an organization called Why Stop, which was another super powerful experience because it's a youth-led organization that does training with young people on how to handle stop and search. And so we brought them in, and they did the workshop, and to sit and listen to, a student that I know who's a nurse and is a black man who gets stopped like every other day by the same police officers under a suspicion of a, whatever. And then we collected some of those experiences and shared those back. And so,
Wow. And I'm wondering, did you hear from Carl at all what that experience was like for him when he came into that space and saw what the students had done?
Yeah, he came to, so the way we had done it, we worked with one of the creative arts people in the campus as well we did this twice actually, so we came back the next year. And the first year he was walking through it was like set up like an exhibition, and he said, can we leave for a bit because I need a break. There's a video, he gave a talk after he had gone through the exhibition, and there's a video on YouTube of him talking, and I think it was quite a moving experience for him.
Yeah. And there's also something so profound about if you're a group of students in a university where you don't feel you've got that capital of kind of being maybe slightly marginalized already, but then the very person whose book you spent the whole time studying gets flown over from America to come to you and is moved by what you've done, like what that does to like how you perceive yourself in that space. Were there any kind of particular transformations or changes or responses you saw amongst the students that gave you a sense of what that course and that experience had done for them?
Oh, I mean, I wish I had kept better track of things, because even the assessments that I did for this module, like I did a multiple choice like content exam.
Yeah.
Then they had to write an essay, and then I did an oral exam. And I had one student who came in who became tearful in the oral exam because of the confidence in being able to talk about these topics in that classroom. They were then able to go as a minoritized person working in the NHS to advocate for themselves that they deserved a raise, that they deserved a promotion in their position. And they articulated that was the direct relationship between the confidence built there to be able to then, in that space, which feels very racist, that they deserved and had the confidence to be able to speak about that. And that's just one. And then I had another person who moved through this, because then the second year that I did it, I brought those graduates of this, they came and taught with me, which then like doubled the effect, right?
Yes.
And so then I've had teaching assistants. So then when I was doing the 9 to 5 teaching, I had other people around to help. And one of those teaching assistants got called into jury duty. And with the information that they had studied for, now they were working on their second year, working through it. They were on a jury with a young black man in a drug charge, and they convinced the rest of the jury to not charge him.
Yeah, wow. So
people reconnected with their children who had had substance misuse issues. People like reconnected with partners, and people felt 2 years after this, people felt when they went back to their home country, which is very hostile towards, same-sex relationships, they were able to stand up in those spaces to say, no, we're not going to teach that person a lesson. We're going to accept that. So yeah, it was. I mean, it's like every educator's dream.
Wow, thank you. Is there anything else you want to say about this book or experience before we move to your third idea?
I think I probably should say he's updated some of his ideas, and so he has a new book out, and he writes for both lay and academic populations. But in this book, he's arguing for decriminalization, but he's moved on to fully supporting legal regulation.
Okay.
So just...
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. And the final book that we're going to discuss today is Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. Could you tell, for those who aren't familiar with who Bell Hooks is and her legacy, could you say a bit about who Bell Hooks is, and then a bit about this book and what it's meant for you?
So I have a really funny connection with Bell, because when I was an undergrad, I wanted to be a shark biologist, and I'm still rather obsessed with them. And I went to university to study marine biology, and I was very driven to do this. And I had no time for the social sciences or humanities. But liberal arts university in the United States, you kind of have to dip your toe into these things. And I was dating an English major, and he encouraged me to come attend a talk. And so I went, and I was just really snobbish, and I thought, well, this person doesn't even capitalize their name. Like, who are they? And it was bell hooks. And I didn't realize I was in the presence of someone who 25 years later would be like my absolute hero. But yeah, so she writes about teaching, she writes about Black feminism, intersectional feminism. She operates from a position of critical pedagogy, and she builds on the work of a Brazilian educator named Paulo Freire. And so I've been on a real journey around what I think about knowledge and evidence and science, and Belle has been kind of there at both ends. And so I really love her writing. I think she's a beautiful, beautiful writer. And Teaching to Transgress, I have used to think through what I want my classroom to feel like. And I want to use it to think about why I'm teaching, and then what the methods are. And critical pedagogy is about meeting people where they're at, which is what I tried to do with the Carl Hart book and that teaching practice. And it's really been the guiding principle for what I want to do in any teaching space and learning space. So now I use Teaching to Transgress with any group that I teach with. We read the first couple of chapters together, because I want us to have a conversation as learners and teachers, and that's not an identity that sticks. Mm-hmm. I'm a learner, our students are our teachers, and I know we say that a lot, but I think we can enact that in ways that really allow our students to have a voice that is expert in these spaces. There's two quotes that come from that book that I use all the time. If I ever get a tattoo, it's going to be one of them.
Or a shark.
Or, yeah, well, with a shark built in, yes. But no, so she quotes Paulo Freire, and I think we've talked about this. We cannot enter the struggle as objects to later become subjects, which I interpret as, in particularly working in global health, if we want our students to be able to go out into the world to engage in change, they need to feel, that work isn't just a cloak that they put on. It's something that's embodied. It's something that is part of their subjectivity. And we, as educators, need to provide them a safe space to bring that subjectivity to light. And there are so many forces in neoliberal universities that are saying, you're an object, you're a bum in a seat, you just sit here, and I'm going to give you all this information, and you're going to just turn around and then go out into the world and somehow take that information with you in a way that is part of you. And so critical pedagogy and ideas from Freire and also bell hooks, I think, really help us to think about the responsibility that students have when they come into that room, and the responsibility we have in creating environments that are safe for discomfort and vulnerability and what we might say authenticity. All of these are words that we throw around, but I think that they're really we really need to grapple with how we think about them and how we bring them to life. And then the other quote, which is the tattoo quote perhaps, is the classroom remains the most radical space for possibility. And I think it goes without saying, and it's kind of annoyingly a cliche, but we have really big things to talk about. And we need imagination, and we need to feel comfortable and challenged, and classrooms can be that and should be that. And I think we're, in some ways, as educators, I think we're up against some pretty powerful forces that don't want that. So, yeah, so Bell has been a real anchor.
Could you say a bit about when you get this book out in the classroom, are there any occasions that come to mind that you could tell us about where something kind of catches light in the room from this book? Perhaps one where you've had a moment of feeling I'm learning something new, or I'm seeing something in a new light here, that something in that book has sort of catalyzed.
Oh, so many students feel seen when they read. I assign like the first 25 pages where Belle's reflecting on her experience of learning and education, moving from segregated schools to integrated schools, and how when they were integrated, it became a lot less political, and so many of our students, that experience is mirrored in different ways in their own stories. And some of our students that are studying medicine, which I encounter a lot, young Black Muslim women in spaces like medical schools can feel very removed, invisible, but also very visible. Like, there's lots of themes that come out that are just so unbelievably important when it comes to ensuring that institutions are truly like welcoming and inclusive. Yeah, I mean, multiple. Every year there's I guess reflections and insights that come from it.
Thank you, and I guess I'm interested as well in how these three books you've chosen. I guess a lot of the time on this podcast, when we're hearing about ideas, it's about allowing people to see differently and to ask critical questions, and these books all do that. But there's also something about the courage, the way in which books can give people the courage to articulate what they already know to be true and to continue in that truth in a space where that is under constant threat. And I wonder what books like these three that you've brought today do for you as an educator who's trying to keep that kind of liberation in mind in the way that you teach, in, as you mentioned, a space where there are forces that would want to shut that down, or at the very least would not see that as what the business of the university is. I don't know, I wonder if you could speak to that at all.
As you were talking, it reminded me of what so much of feedback from students has been in all the different places I've taught. It's about understanding or becoming conscious of a vocabulary that can be powerful in the way that it explains and narrates their lived experiences. That vocabulary then allows them to assert themselves within systems of power. So, for example, I have a very, very vivid memory of a young Black guy in my class who we were talking about the politics of respectability, and like the literal light bulb moment of, oh my God, that's exactly what I have been thinking and feeling for my entire life. And I've never had any way of describing or narrating that in a way that could lift him into this system over here to say, that's what you're doing to me. And it's not just my feeling, it's something that is, which should be equally valid, but it allows this, to walk in a different space and to walk in that space with a vocabulary that sits there.
And for you as an educator, how do you draw the strength and find the way to continue to do the sort of teaching and to adopt this sort of, to keep doing this year on year in a space that where that wouldn't be the normal way of going about things?
Classrooms are sacred, and that's what I really tried. I will protect that space and what I want it to be and what I want it to feel like. I had a mentor when I was doing my PhD at Buffalo in New York State, and his name was Bob Denton, and Bob was just like the most powerful educator I've ever met in my life, and he would blow people's minds, but then hug and hold them intellectually or literally, and I've always said, find a Bob and be a Bob, and I've been very, very lucky to be able to feel that with some students, it's silly. Or maybe it's not, I don't know. It's ripples, right? It really does do that. We can't all be Paul Farmer, who goes out and fundamentally reshapes WHO policy. It's amazing that he does that, right? But we have our little spaces in our classrooms where we can have big conversations.
And still see transformation.
Yeah, and like really fundamental.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to say about bell hooks or this book before we finish?
No, I think that's good, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. It's been a really enjoyable conversation, and thank you for bringing these three ideas. And thank you to everyone who's been listening to this episode today. We'll be back with another episode soon.